Really what I have to share is, I think in many cases has been very nicely addressed by the speakers yesterday afternoon and Kathleen here earlier this morning, talking a little bit about consumers. My background is I grew up about 3 hours west of here. I've got a background in meat science from Kansas State and the University of Kentucky. I'm a production background person, a family farm and ranch. And I probably think a lot like you on most of these topics. What I have found over the 15 years that I've been with Certified Angus Beef is that those of us in this room, to maybe answer a question that Dr. Raymond mentioned during the question and answers yesterday when he said maybe I'm an anomaly when shopping the meat case. Most of us here are anomalies when shopping the meat case. Most of us either in this room are either clear on this end of the bell-shaped curve or on this end of the bell-shaped curve. We've got the extremes covered, but the heart of our consuming public sits somewhere in the middle. And, it's kind of like given the record the Kansas City Chiefs have right now, when it comes to consumers, you honestly can't ever hope to control them. You can only hope to contain them. And they've got a lot of needs and a lot of desires and a lot of wants. And in many cases, they've got the affluence to demand that their needs and wants be met. And while over 15 years with Certified Angus Beef, on the consumer side, my opinions probably haven't changed a lot, but I can tell you my perspective has. My perspective has changed drastically over that time period, and again, to that point, I have a greater appreciation for where consumers are coming from and what they're trying to tell us through the signals that they're sending to us. And so, what I want to provide just very quickly is to give you just a background. I hope many of you are familiar with Certified Angus Beef. I would be surprised if many of you are overly familiar of who we are and how we operate. And so I want to just give you some perspective on why we feel we have at least an insight into this topic, not an insight as intimate as Heinen's and as Wegmans, who are right there at the customer interface each and every day. But we were the first branded program certified by the USDA back in 1978. Today, we still are third-party certified by both USDA and the Canadian Beef Grading Agency for the plants that we work with in Canada. We're a not-for-profit organization, and we're owned by the American Angus Association, and we work on behalf of farmers and ranchers throughout North America to increase demand for the registered Angus cattle that they raise by focusing on the quality perception and the quality image and the eating experience of the product. We've been around, like I said, 35 years. We just celebrated here October 18th last month. And during that time period, the last 7 years, we've experienced record sales growth, selling here just 865 million pounds this last year. And I'll come back to why that's important when I kind of touch base on something that Tom Heinen said yesterday. We work with over 16,000 licensees. Worldwide, about 6,000 of that 16,000 would be retail stores, both domestically and international. And what's been interesting is that the issues and the questions that consumers have, they cross economic barriers or economic stratus, okay? They cross ethnic differences. They cross borders. And there is an inherent interest on behalf of consumers worldwide to know more about what they're spending their money on. And that is something that's fairly universal from our experience. Just to give you some idea about of that tonnage that I shared with you, we're roughly half of our business is retail. A third of it is food service, both casual dining and high-end. And then obviously 13% is international business that continues to grow. And again, that miscellaneous there is, our computer guys couldn't figure out where to code some pounds, so that 9% just sits at 9% about every year. So sometimes it grows. Sometimes it's the only thing that grows, and that's when you want to be in charge of the miscellaneous category. But the things I've been asked to touch on, again, like I said, I don't want to take a lot of the time here to reiterate a lot of the points that have already been made. I will touch on them, the things about trust, the things about transparency, those things that are so important to this conversation. But what I've been asked to touch on is specific to the observations that we have as Certified Angus Beef and to what are we seeing from a consumer perspective on what's enhancing or impacting demand. What are we seeing in terms of the information that's being sent to us, the signals that are being sent to us, and then what are we seeing within our partners our retailers and restaurants and distributors who are, again, the point interface with the consumer, and what are we seeing as action steps to take moving forward, and both as a company and as an industry. And so this was touched on almost in passing by Tom yesterday. And in all honesty, I think this is, for us, this is one of the most important things that we've learned over the last 7 years. We've been around 35 years. We didn't know this until the last 7. And the reason I say that is because what's happened globally the last 7 years? How's the economy been the last 7 years? It's been in the tank. The economy's been in the tank, not just here domestically, but truly globally. And before the economy tanked, or when we could start to see that it was going to tank, it was logical that not just our program, but virtually every premium program in the meat industry stepped back and said, this is going to be a tough time. Maybe now's the time to downgrade our quality. Maybe now's the time to put a program out there that focuses only on price, because we can see what's coming at us. Well, maybe fortunately or unfortunately, some of us aren't in a position to dictate those things. And so our program, as well as other programs, Weber Grills, Haagen-Dazs ice cream, take premium products across different segments of the retail store. And what we saw during the last 7 years is we saw record sales, or increase in sales, during one of the worst economic time periods that our country in particular has ever seen. And so what that began to tell us is what Tom touched on at the very end, is it's not just price. Okay? It's price in relation to value. And I share that because as we've defined value in the meat industry for quite some time, it's been on quality. For us, it's been on marbling. The differences in quality grades of beef is how value has historically been defined. It's definitely been how things have been priced in the meat case or on the menu. And we still continue to see that. It is not, some things haven't changed. Okay? And here at a conference focused on a true issue with consumers, I also want to come back and frame this discussion in relation to what we see in our world in the big picture, across 6,000 stores, 60,000 restaurants that use the product. What we see is that at the end of the day, this is an important discussion, and I'll touch more on that. But it's still not the thing that's driving demand. Demand is still being driven by taste, by value, as we've talked about before. And these are the top 5 drivers of decision-making processes on meat consumption or meat purchasing patterns funded by the Beef Checkoff. Received this information from NCBA. And again, I say that because as you can see across the top line, taste and the experience that we have when we eat a product, when we eat a protein product, continues to be and has been for a long time the driving factor. And there's the data, the numbers that support that. I say that because our focus has remained very clear as an industry, I think, on delivering that experience. What I also want to draw our attention to is as you look to the bottom of this chart, and you look right there at the very bottom, industry acts in consumers' interest. Wasn't even a question that was asked in 2007. And today, I think some of these numbers that we see here begin to fall in line with what we saw yesterday afternoon in terms of the study that was done on behalf of Heinen's in preparation for this meeting. And so the point that I make is that the consumer is giving us a lot of signals, and factors about quality and value today go beyond the traditional. They start to include a lot of these extrinsic cues about what consumers are looking for. Food safety, obviously, wholesomeness, sensory attributes I obviously have in there as well. But these other things, convenience, humanely raised, natural, organic, grass-fed, local, socially responsible, free range. All these things that tend to move away from inherent characteristics of protein and become process attributes of how we raise and how we produce these products. And I put this on here because as a program who's so inherently tied to a traditional definition of quality, this becomes very important to us because we try to look back and see what happened in the past. And if you go back and you look at the last time as an industry, this is specific to beef, but as an industry, when we put the consumer in the back seat rather than alongside us, I'm not saying in the front seat, but alongside us, we saw basically a 2-decade decline in beef market share. What that tells us is that even for a program rooted in the traditional definition of quality and value, is that we better put our arm around that consumer and start finding out how we stay relevant to them moving forward. For us and what we've experienced, it's really not about trying to get someone to trust you, and we've heard a lot about trust, and I would agree wholeheartedly. What it is for us is continuing to give the person who's on our team a reason to continue to trust us. And that means a growing relationship with consumers. That means something that I'll talk about here in a little bit, and it's been touched on before, that creates an emotional connection between not just what we produce, but why we do it and how we do it in regards to meeting their needs. So, we did listen to the consumer, and we did put a product out there for our retailers and restaurateurs to embrace that began to put at the forefront, some of these things that are process related. You can see up there at the upper right is our natural brand extension. We put that in place in 2004 at the request of our licensed partners who felt they were losing business. And you can see up there, it says animals never receive antibiotics or hormones, no artificial ingredients, which is obviously the USDA definition. All animals traceable to place of birth, 100% vegetarian diet. Keep in mind, I'm a traditional production and agriculture guy. We had this label in place for 2 years before I could read that last statement and not giggle. And we've got to say 100% vegetarian diet. But it speaks to the fact that we are in a situation where we're speaking the language of consumers and what's relevant and meaningful to them. And we can expect customers and consumers to come to us, and we can wait around and be really lonely, or we can go to where they're at, and we can create a relationship that's mutually beneficial. To give you some idea, as Tom Heinen spoke, their entire meat case on the beef side is antibiotic free and so forth. For us, in terms of our realm of business, the natural program out of 865 million pounds represents 7 million is what it represents. But it is a very strong message to those consumers who might go elsewhere looking for a product that's important to them. So Kathleen shared some comments that they received. These are some comments that we receive within our shop. Most of the comments related to our brand, in all honesty, go to our partners, because they are the direct interface in many cases with the consumer. These were pulled from the last couple of weeks, and you can see the first one there is all certified Angus beef hormone-free. I can only see the natural is hormone-free. Thank you. The second one there I think is important because it touches on a couple of things. And the second one there is certified Angus beef grass-fed. What about hormones, antibiotics, GMOs, etc.? The stringent rules of being certified would eliminate them, correct? And so to the question earlier about why are consumers lumping things together, I don't exactly know why they are, but this is a big confusing area for consumers, and they lump all these things together. They lump everything they don't understand into this pool of question that they look for us to begin to answer for them, and I think justifiably so. The area there that I have underlined is important because it's what we're beginning to see that as brands, not just our brand, but as brands, consumers begin to bestow upon you certain attributes that may or may not be true or may not be things you've asked for. When they look for you and they trust you, they begin to assume that there's no way you would participate in these other industry practices that they may not see as in their best interest or they may have concerns with. And so, it's just a point of reference for us as a kind of a litmus test to understand that, our responsibility of communicating oftentimes goes beyond just the finite things that define what a program is or define what a brand is. It really goes to addressing all concerns that consumers have, and we have an obligation to be a part of that discussion. So here's what we seem to operate in today. That the rising interest in knowing more about food has put consumers on an extremely steep learning curve. And maybe the most important thing here is it's also created a very dynamic marketing environment with many experts. Anyone can be an expert. You just have to have a convincing web page or blog or a few more followers or a few extra likes. And so anyone can be an expert. And to probably reiterate something you've always heard before, there are gaps in information, but they never go unfilled, do they? They will always be filled with something. And we're no different about things that we're naive about in the consumer world. And so it would be odd to believe that consumers buying protein would be any differently than we are. But it's created an environment where we're obviously trying to differentiate on many different things in the market today to grab the attention of the consumer. And what that tells us is that this isn't going to go away because it's been a huge point of differentiation in the marketplace. And it's only going to continue to be probably a stronger point of difference, a bigger playing field, if you will, of trying to attract consumers to products, to different processes and so forth. It's not going to be something, in our opinion, that we see backing down. More information, more work to differentiate and get factual information out there is only going to be the standard. It's not going to get any easier moving forward to keep and grow the trust of consumers. So for us, credibility is established, in our opinion, by communicating two things. It's by communicating the technical and the emotional information that's relevant to consumers. It's not one or the other. It's easy to push the science. What we have found in our business is, that eating food and dining and buying food, it's an emotional thing. It is probably for many of us. But we have found if we try to remove the emotion from the purchasing decision, we are probably actually doing our industry an injustice than we are doing something to move it forward. And so it really is a balance between the science and the emotional connection that we can make with consumers. This is just a point that Tom really iterated on a little bit earlier yesterday, that it's about the product, it's about the people, it's about the integrity that these programs have, that our products have in the eyes of consumers as an industry. And again, I just drive home the point that all these things, it's not one or the other, it's all these things that are extremely important. Trust is not simply based on what we say. What we have found, it's based on ultimately what the person we're communicating to understands and what they believe. And I think that's where it comes back to maybe the question, why do they put hormones and antibiotics together? Because they don't understand or really believe what we're saying about either one of them. And so they lump them together, and as they do with GMOs and beta agonists and some of these other things that we're hearing more about as well. So what are we doing? We're trying to be proactive, just like everybody else. We're doing a lot of the same things. We're trying to interface with consumers. We're working really hard to tell the story, so to speak. We used to take consumer groups and industry leaders, chefs and retailers to those picturesque mountainsides where Angus cattle graze in Montana. What we do today is we take them to the largest confinement feeding operation we can find. We take them to a 5,200 head a day packing plant. We take them to the realities of our industry and try to communicate that where it's the most difficult so we can establish, hopefully, the highest level of credibility in what we're talking about. And I do believe that many in the industry are trying to do the same thing. I think the things that we're seeing going on industry-wide with the food dialogues and so forth is very, very important. Because what we're finding is that in many cases, where you have the very progressive, like the Heinens and the Wegmans, not every retailer is in an area or every restaurateur is in an area or in a position to where they've created their own story. In most cases, most people that are engaging customers are trying to tell our story, the story we're giving them. And it's a very factual story. It's got a lot of merit to it, but it's not an easy story to communicate. And so, especially when consumers at the meat case, they really listen in sound bites. They don't listen in long, drawn-out conversations on topics. It's education by sound bite. And that becomes a very difficult thing, but things like the food dialogues and so forth, we believe are very good initiatives that the industry has had. We try to engage consumers and bring the end user in touch with the rancher, and show that chain to hopefully communicate that there are shared values across the entire industry from one end to the other. And again, we try to remember this, is that the only sustainable flow of dollars which can continue to support the beef industry as we're involved in ultimately come from the consumer. And the reality is we can make a choice. We don't have to supply them with what they want or what they're asking for or give them more information or make some changes to the way we produce things today. We don't have to. We just have to go find another customer. Because I think the point was made very clear yesterday that the idea that they will buy protein regardless is something that we have found is not a very safe assumption. And especially when we're all really battling to try to maintain credibility and grow our presence and trust with consumers.